Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for attending today's IBM Middleware User Community Ask the Experts webcast. My name is Kelsey Lammers and I'll be hosting today's webcast. Our topic for today is configuring SSL on Netcool Impact 7.1. All phone lines are currently in listen-only mode. There will be a question and answer session towards the end of the presentation. However, you may ask a question at any time during the presentation using the questions window located in the control panel. Also, look for a forum link in your chat box and feel free to continue any discussions after the webcast in this forum. Tomorrow we will have the recording and slides of today's presentation available on the IBM Middleware User Community website for you to access. You will receive a follow-up email with a link to the archives. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. We have joining us Pedro Guerra. He is a software engineer with IBM Middleware for Netcool support. Thank you, Pedro, for joining us today. The floor is now yours.
Thank you. Welcome everybody. So first, good morning, good afternoon, and I know some probably EMEA people, good evening. So today I'm going to cover the Netcool Impact 7.x SSL setup using the scripts that we currently have that development nicely created for us on 7.x. So let's go to the agenda. So the first thing we're going to cover is, using the script that they put in on Impact, how to create, we'll create the certificates and configure all the self-sign configuration for you. The second one part, we're going to, kind of check that configuration, what has changed, what ports are you using. And the third one will be, we're going to connect using SSL from the Impact to an SSL object server. And then at the end, I'll have some, you'll be able to ask me any questions. So there's a couple of scenarios we're going to cover on this presentation. So scenario one will be you having Impact install with the GUI server component of Impact on the same server and the same directory, right? I've seen some configurations that way, but most people have scenario two, which is you have an Impact server and a GUI server and two different servers. You can add the cluster component, so you will have another third server probably for another Impact server, and you will have those two clusters plus one GUI server. But the configuration of the SSL will be the same exact thing for a cluster as scenario two. So what is this famous script that development has provided for us, and which has been working great? So this script is located under Impact Home Install Security Directory. So the name is config impact SSL.sh. So what does that do to you? Right? What that script does is just configures the entire Impact server, creates the self-signed certificates, and changes the port and the name server.props to SSL true on Impact. So it does it for the Impact and the GUI. Now, I always like to do the help on the config impact SSL to see what other options do I have. So there's three options that you have. One of them is, of course, you're going to enable and disable the password, the key store password. Now, the key store password is your Impact admin password. So remember, when you install an Impact, there is an option where that says the dimensions create a user and a password for this installation. So usually by default is the Impact admin username, and you just create a password. Now, you could use any other user, yes, but it has to be the user that you created during the installation. So if you change it, instead of being Impact admin to admin or to any other name, make sure you know that password, because that's what you're going to need to enable this, to run this script. The third part of it is FIPS, which I'm not be covering on this presentation, and I'm planning to do that one in a following presentation, doing a FIPS compliant mode with CA certificates. So that is the command help, and in my case, I'm just going to enable the self-sign, which will be the first example, which I enable it, and I will use the key store password. So now I run the command exactly the same way as the example. So I go to the security, I run the config impact SSL.sh, I make sure it is enabled, and I use my password for my Impact admin, which is, I use Netcool to keep it simple. I pasted two options, two successfully responses. And the reason I did this is because if you have everything as scenario one configured on one server, you just run this configuration and it will configure the GUI and impact at the same time. Now, for scenario two, you will have to run the same script to configure the impact UI and configure the impact server itself. So that's what I pasted to build successful. So one took 7 seconds, which was my GUI server, and my impact server took 40 seconds to be configured. So now a couple of things that the documentation is a little bit confusing, and I got a couple of PMRs about this one. One of them is in scenario two, right? So basically you run the script, and so what do you do next, right? So they go jump in and says, oh, if you have a cluster environment, you need to exchange the certificates between the impact servers and the impact GUI and the impact GUI server. Yes, you also have to do that if you're not on a cluster. So if you are on a scenario two where you have impact installed on one server and GUI installed on another server, you still need to exchange their certificates so they know that they're working on SSL. If you don't do that, you're not completely on SSL communication. It still works. I actually talked to development about it. I said we should have a message saying that you're not, fully compliant, because you still need to exchange the certificates. You need to export the certificates and import the certificates. So that's what I mentioned here. Scenario two, you need to export and import the certificates. So the first thing I did is export the certificates. So I put the whole command as the key to using the key to tool to export. I put the entire command that I have on the documentation, and I broke it down a little bit so it's it's a little bit easier to understand where I'm coming from. So this is my split scenario. So basically I have I'm going to export my self-signed certificate from the impact server. So as you can see, my instance name is called NCI. So I put my directory where I install impact. Then I go to SDK bin key tool. I do the export. Then I go all the way to my instance name, which will be my NCI server, and I just export the file. And then again, it asks you for the stored password. The stored password is the password that you use, the account that you use when you were doing the installation. In this case was impact admin, and my password was Netcool. So I export, and then it creates a certificate. It tells you where the certificate is at and the name of the certificate. So my certificate is called nci.cert. So I know that's my impact server certificate. I do the same thing for the GUI side, and I call it impact UI. I kept it simple. I kept the same name that I have in my instance name. So I export the certificate and I call it impact UI cert. So after I do that, what I do is I copy the certificate to my impact server, my UI certificate to my impact server, and my impact server certificate to my UI server. So what do I do next? After I copy those, I need to import them, right? So I pasted again the command how to import, and I broke it down for my configuration. So I go to my UI server first, and I grab the nci.cert that I copy, and I import it. So then, you will see when you run the command, you will see quite a bit some messages, and at the end you will say, do you trust the certificate? If you say no, it will not import it. If you say yes, it will import it. So once it's imported, you're ready to go in that sense. Then you go back to the impact certificate and impact server and do the same thing, importing the UI certificate. So again, I say yes, and I'm ready to go. Now, how do I check that I'm, using SSL, right? So one thing that I mentioned, I got this from the documentation, and the first thing you do is check the web XML file, make sure your SSL equals to true. You also check the nameserver.props that is part of the impact server and GUI server. But the best thing I noticed is to do a testing on the using the SSL port that is in your name server.props. So by going to the name server and services, so the third option. So that only works if you already configure an SSL. If you're not configuring SSL, that will not work. So let me bring this up my screen. Let me show you what I have done. Let me know if you guys can see that.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. So on the GUI server, so this is my installation for the GUI server, the bottom part, let me make that bigger. So this is where I installed the UI. So this is my split server. So if I go to the etc directory, then I do a cat on the name server.props, you will see that SSL is enabled to true. That's one thing you can check. The other thing is, I'm not using default ports. By default, the port is 9080. In my case, I use 9088. And then if you can see this, it changed to 9089. So what happens is, when you install Impact, you select your ports, or you can go with default ports. If using default ports, will be 9080. So when it converts it to SSL, will be 9081. It adds one number to it. So this is my GUI. So it's configured on SSL. So that's the first thing I would check on the GUI side. Now if I go to my Impact side of it, let me see, this is that's not the one I want. That's the other configuration. Okay, this one right here. So this is my Impact installation, and I'll do the same thing. I'll go under, let's see where I'm at, and I just go to under etc directory, and I do the same thing, name server.props. This should match what I have on my GUI server. So SSL is enabled to true, and I'm using exactly the same port, 9089. Now there's one more thing. How do I know what port I'm using? How do I know this is right? How do I know I just didn't go ahead and update it right manually? So if you go back to your Impact server, you go under WLP users USR servers. In this case, I'll choose NCI, which is my instance name for Impact, right? And then if you do open this bootstrap.properties, it shows you all the ports that you have available. So for HTTP, when I install, I use 9088. When it converts to SSL, I should be using 9089. So this matches what I have here, 9089. On my name server.props. Okay, so that's another way to check. Let me show you now what I meant in the browser. So in the browser, so let me clear this out. So again, on the browser, this is what I did. I went to my server name. I used HTTPS. I went to my server name, and I used the 9089 port, name server services. This only works if you are configured on SSL. By default, I should have gone to 9088, not HTTP, to see my cluster configure or my server if it's up and running. But this only works if it's configured in SSL using the configuration on your name server.props. So I run this, and it shows that my server is up and running, and it's working on that port. So I know SSL is configured correctly. Okay, so let's go back here now. Oops, so there's reset. Okay, last part of it that I'm going to cover here is connecting to an SSL object server. So I obtain, the client or the CA certificate from the object server team. And I need to import it now to my Impact. Now, I need to import the certificate. It doesn't matter if it's scenario 1, scenario 2, you need to import it to the UI and the Impact server. If you do not do that, what's going to happen is this. you'll be able to communicate. Impact is, so let's say you're only imported to the Impact server, right? The back end of Impact will be able to connect. But the front end, when you go and click on the test button for your browser, is not going to work. And this is why you need to import the certificate from any client, not only the object server. It could be an LDAP client, it could be a database client. Any client that's running an SSL, you need to import it to both the GUI and the server. So you copy the certificate anywhere you want it where the Impact server is running, and you run the same command that we used before, and you use the same exact password. In this case, the certificate name was NCOM CA Cert. So it was a CA certificate that I got from my colleagues at Object Server. So I kept the same name. You know, I said, hey, the alias is going to be NCOM CA Cert. I put the location, which I copy under op Pedro, you know, NCOM CA Cert. Now run import and imports it. I get the same message as before. Do you want to import the certificate? I say yes. Trusted is up and running. So now that happens on the Impact server. Then I do the same exact thing on the GUI server. Okay, so you need to keep that in mind. Now, once I do that, I notice two things. Okay, you need to restart your Impact server and your GUI server in order for this to work. In some cases, I noticed that I didn't have to reboot. I had to give it some time, but best thing is to just restart your servers to make sure, you know, the new properties are working. So once I do that, you know, I was able to communicate to my object server. So let me show you what I real quick on the browser. So this is so I did two things. So this is one of my Impact servers. This is the one that I imported the certificate on both. So if I go right, and then I'm going to go to my data model. So I made a default object server. So this is the server that I make sure I click SSL mode. If I don't have this checked, it's not going to work. Test connection. And the connection is okay. So this is where I imported my CA certificate from the object server. So key question on this is you need to make sure you import the certificate to the UI, to the Impact server, and you need to check SSL mode. If you don't check SSL mode, it's not going to work. Now, I have another server where I didn't import the certificate. Okay, and let me show you that now. In this one, I did not import the certificate, and I'm trying to connect to the same server. This is what's going to happen. It's not, let's see, Impact admin, Netcool. It's coming up. So I did the default object server again. So it's the same exact server. 76, I click test connection, and connection could not be made. Okay, even if I click SSL enable, text connection, it's not going to be made. Let me save it just in case it didn't take the enablement. So it's not going to work. So that, that shows you that, the other one I imported, everything's working. This one I didn't import the certificate, it's not going to work. So let me go back now. So a couple of things I want you to, a couple of APARs and links that came up during, while I was setting up this presentation. One of them is there's people having problems with the default browser SSL certificate that was provided. You tried, either the certificate's about to expire, you need to replace it. There was an APAR called IV 78526, which was part of FixPack 4. My recommendation is to go to the, you can go to the FixPack 5 link that I pasted here on this presentation. You'll be able to get more information on what you need to do in the step-by-step on that APAR. The other APAR that I have is APAR IB83127. This APAR is I'm trying to, it's still open, it's not closed yet, and I'm still working with development, but I just want to bring it up to this in this presentation. Is what we're going to do is how to replace the certificates using the key tool. I know we can use the iKeyman tool, which is a GUI interface, but some people has been asking me the same thing using key tool. So I'm working on this one on development, and once I have it, I might do just a quick video, and I'll share with you guys how to do that. Also, when I'm working on it, after this presentation, is going to be this exact configuration. I'm going to convert it to a CA certificate. So I'll have part 2 on this SSL. Okay. So for now, this ends the presentation. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I'd be glad to answer them.
We did receive a few questions in email prior to this session.
Sure.
Pedro, I'll go ahead and ask those first.
Yeah.
Can Netcool Impact SSL be configured manually?
Yes, you can do that. And then we actually have a section on our documentation where you can configure manually. Basically, you run the key tool. So you run the key tool to export the certificates, to import the certificates, and then you need to manually change the XML file, manually change the name server.props file. Yes.
Okay. The next question is, what ports will be used for SSL?
So the ports that you'll be using are the ports that are configured on the link that I show you, which on the name server.props. Let me see if I can go back to there. Let me see, I have this one right here. So the ports, let me see if there wasn't on this. Let me get this server. Okay, I think here. So the Bootstrap top properties. So the one port that you would use definitely, instead of using your HTTP port, would be the 9089, right? For the name server.props. So that's from what I remember, that's top of my head, that's the only port that's changed. And then on the GUI side also changes. If you're using 16.3.10 by default, it will change to 16.3.11. So in my case, I'm not using all ports, you know, so it will add up one number for the HTTPS.
Okay, we have a couple of questions. If you have the Impact Dash integration already set up, and you then switch your Impact server over to using SSL, do you have to reconfigure your Impact server integration with Dash?
So let me see if I get that question right. So you already have Impact set up on SSL, right? And you're trying to...
So they have Impact set up with Dash.
With Dash.
And then they switch the Impact server over to using SSL.
Good question. I will assume you want to have everything on SSL, right? You don't want to have part of it non-SSL. So I haven't done this, but I can investigate this, and I could probably do a future presentation on it. You will want to configure SSL also in Dash. And then what you probably need to do is exchange certificates again, right? You need to exchange because you're using Dash as UI as your UI portal now. So you probably need to get the certificates from Impact GUI and server to the Dash, and the Dash certificate imported to the Impact server and UI. But I'll look into that, how to do that process. But yes, you probably want to do that. Configure everything on SSL.
Okay, the next question, if anyone has any other questions about that, go ahead and type them in to the questions. The next question was, how do you get the object server cert? I did a presentation 2 weeks ago, and I'll post a link to it, but it goes over how to create the object server certificates, and what you export from the object server key database is the CA certificate. Okay, we have another question. Will we be covering the differences in installation, configuration, etc. to using self-signed certificates versus one from a CA?
Yeah, so my next part of it, this is I just cover self-sign, right? So my next presentation, a continuation of this will be now, because I've seen this in the field where people are using self-sign and then they switch to CA. So I will do part 2 using the same exact 2 scenarios here, converting and using CA certificates. I didn't want to cover both of them at the same time. I didn't want to confuse you with the script and then, you know, hey, we're changing to CA. So now this is done. You're in self-sign, running on self-sign mode. Now let's switch you to CA certificate. So I'll do that next. I'll do that presentation next. It's probably coming up soon. Probably in the next 2 months or so, or maybe sooner.
Okay, we have one more question. I have a CA signed certificate, but I can't make it the default. Impact always serves the self-signed certificate to the browser.
Yeah, so that's part of the APAR that I mentioned, which is covered on FixPack 4. You might want to take a look at this APAR. That's exactly what it covers. So the trick here is this. What you need to do is remove the old one and put the new one and rename it default. So that's APAR 78526. So I'll recommend either, you know, going to the link that I pasted here for FixPack 5. That will list also the APARs that will cover on FixPack 4, and look at the APAR IB 78526.
Okay, thanks, Pedro. If anyone has any more questions, go ahead and type them into the chat. I'll give a couple more minutes for questions. Okay, I think that's it. Do you have anything else to say, Pedro?
No, thanks everyone for attending, and you know, I'll see you guys on the CA's certificate presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Pedro, and thank you, Christina. Feel free to continue any discussions in the Optimizing IT and Service Management Forum in the IBM Middleware User Community website. The link is located in your chat box right now. Again, we will have the recording and slides available tomorrow in our webcast archives. You'll receive a follow-up email with a link to those. As you exit, please take a few moments to fill out the post-event survey. This helps us improve future events. We truly appreciate your feedback. This concludes today's event. Thank you all and have a fantastic day.